Welcome back to my channel, where we explore the darkest corners of the internet. Tonight, we dive into disturbing true stories from Reddit, Segment 1. These aren't tales born from horror movies, these are true accounts shared by real people, and they'll stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Turn off the lights, plug in your headphones, and prepare yourself. This is not for the faint of heart. A chilling account of a user who woke to find a shadow-like entity watching them from the corner of the room. As the nights go on, the entity gets bolder, moving, standing closer, until it finally disappears after a desperate plea to something unknown. A woman who's struggled with sleep paralysis starts seeing a young girl in her dreams. The girl holds a teddy bear and watches in silence. The situation escalates when teddy bears begin showing up everywhere in her real life until one is found on her doorstep in the middle of the night. After moving to a new apartment, a Redditor starts hearing whispers and footsteps. When they finally confront the noise one night, they see a man at the end of the hall, tall, still, with no eyes, just voice. The man is gone the moment they look away, but the knocking on the walls never stops. These stories remind us that the line between reality and nightmare is thinner than we think. Have you experienced something you can't explain? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next haunting chapter. Until then, sleep with one eye open. Welcome to Disturbing True Stories from Reddit, where the strangest, most chilling tales shared by real people come to life. These aren't ghost stories passed down around campfires, they're true accounts that Redditors swear actually happened to them. Tonight, you're about to hear 3 unsettling experiences that will leave you checking behind the shower curtain and locking your doors twice. Sit back, turn the lights down, and listen closely. When I was 10, I started waking up at night with the horrible feeling of being watched. My room was at the end of a long hallway, and from my bed, I could see straight down it. That night, I saw something. At first, it looked like a person, someone tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, but its outline was jagged, almost like it had been torn out of paper. Its edges twitched with a natural movement, like it was made of shadows with sharp fingers. It didn't walk, it glided, and I swear it didn't cast a shadow, it was a shadow. It stopped right in front of my parents' bedroom door, and then turned its flat, impossible face toward me. No eyes, no mouth, just holes shaped like features. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I pulled the covers over my head like a child, because at 10, you still believe that maybe a blanket can protect you from evil. But I knew it was there, right outside my room, maybe inches from my face. By morning, it was gone. But I never slept with the door open again. To this day, I don't know if it was a dream, a hallucination, or something else entirely, but I know what I saw, and it saw me too. Years later, in 2017, a woman living alone started noticing something odd. Teddy bears everywhere. It started with sleep paralysis, terrifying visions of a little girl holding a teddy bear, just staring at her with hollow eyes. Then, during her nightly dog walks, a black cat began stalking her, always at night, always watching. And then came the bears, a teddy bear sticker in a gas station bathroom, a teddy tossed in the middle of the freeway, a mangled, dirt-covered bear left on her front porch at 3:00 am. No note, no explanation. She tried to convince herself it was a prank, until a stranger approached her in a grocery store parking lot, smiled, and offered her a tiny teddy bear with that same dead-eyed grin. She said no. He looked angry. That was the last time she saw a bear, but she swears, to this day, they show up just when her life starts to feel off. She doesn't sleep easily anymore, and she never accepted another gift from a stranger again. A man and his wife lived in a small house with a sliding glass door facing the backyard. One night, while his wife was away visiting family, he woke to the sound of gentle knocking. He assumed it was the wind until it happened again, this time louder. When he checked the backyard with a flashlight, no one was there. But the next morning, there were two sets of footprints in the frost-covered grass, one heading toward the house and none going back. He checked the security cam. It had mysteriously stopped recording between 2:33 and 2:47 am. He called the police. They found nothing. A week later, his wife returned, and that night, the knocking came again. This time, at the front door. They didn't answer, but in the morning, They found another set of prints and a note on their doorstep. It said, "You sleep so peacefully." Not every disturbing story ends with a clear explanation. Sometimes, the creepiest part isn't what you saw, it's what was watching you. This was just the beginning. More true, terrifying stories await in the next segment. When Reddit user Throwaway Horror 89 was 16, their family moved into a rural home with a large backyard and an old storage shed. The shed was always locked with rusted chains, and their father said it hadn't been used in decades. One night, the family dog began growling at the backyard. Curious, the user looked through their window and saw movement near the shed. A shadow, a tall, gaunt figure was moving just outside the dim porch light's reach. Thinking it might be an animal, they went to tell their dad. By the time he came out, the figure was gone. But when they approached the shed, the door was slightly ajar despite the chains still being locked. Inside, they found claw marks on the walls. Not scratches, deep gouges, like someone had been trying to dig through concrete with bare hands. In the corner, an old mattress and a tattered coat. Someone had been living there. They called the police, but no one was ever found. The next night, the family dog went missing. 2 days later, they found a note nailed to the back door. It read only, "Thanks for the bat. See you soon." Reddit a Midnight Orbit shared a story from their college years. They had just transferred to a university and were staying in off-campus house in a massive, old house divided into rental rooms. Their room was on the 3rd floor, next to an oddly placed door that always remained locked. No one, not even the landlord, ever used it. They assumed it was just attic access. One night, after returning late from a study session, they noticed the door was open for the first time. Curiosity got the better of them. Inside was a fully furnished bedroom, immaculate, like a display, but something was wrong. The furniture was vintage, the wallpaper faded, and everything had a slight layer of dust. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. As they explored the room, they heard footsteps behind them, except they were alone. Suddenly, all the lights went out. Panicking, they turned to leave only to find the door they came in through was gone, replaced by solid wall. They screamed, banged. After what felt like hours, they found themselves back in the hallway, door open behind them, the room gone, wall sealed, like it never existed. Weeks later, an elderly neighbor told them the house once belonged to a family who vanished mysteriously, last seen in the room above the third floor. User quiet moments. Free had just given birth to her first child and relied heavily on a baby monitor to ease her new parent anxiety. One night, around 2:30 am, she heard something strange over the monitor, a voice, whispering. Not her baby, not even a child's voice. It was a low, rasping adult whisper, repeating the same words. "Don't worry, I'm watching him too." Thinking she was just sleep deprived, she ran into the baby's room. The baby was sleeping peacefully, nothing out of place. The next night, it happened again, same whisper, slightly louder. She unplugged the monitor and called her husband, who was away on business. He told her to stay with family until he returned. When he came back and checked the home security footage, the camera outside the nursery window caught something chilling. A figure standing at the edge of the backyard for over 40 minutes just watching the nursery window. The police never found who it was. She threw away the monitor, but sometimes, she swears she can still hear faint whispering even when it's off. Some stories haunt because they're unexplainable, others because they feel a little too real. Whatever the cause, the fear lingers. We'll be back with even darker stories, from haunted forests to terrifying online encounters. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you're brave enough to keep going. Some stories are grounded in the unknown, the things we can't explain, no matter how hard we try, but some, well, they make us question everything we think we know. This next story comes from a Reddit user who found themselves face to face with a stranger who knew things no one should know. It starts like any ordinary day. A woman in her mid-30s, working a late shift at a grocery store, going through the motions of stocking shelves, ringing up customers, the usual. But that evening, something felt off. She wasn't alone. The store wasn't empty, but the presence of a man in the aisle she was in made her feel uneasy. Not because of what he looked like, but because of the things he said. "Long day?" he asked, casually, as he picked up a can of soup from the shelf. She nodded, making small talk, but there was something in the way he said it, something that felt wrong, and then he followed up with, "Your sister's birthday is in 2 days, right?" Her blood ran cold. She didn't have a sister. Confused, she asked him what he meant, but the man only smiled, a twisted grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I know all about you," he said. "Your real name is Lucy, right? You used to live in that old house on Birch Street. Don't you miss it?" Her breath caught in her throat. How did he know that? How did he know about the house? She hadn't told anyone about her childhood home in years. She tried to shake it off, brushing it off as a weird coincidence, but it didn't stop there. He followed her down the aisles, asking her more and more personal questions, things only someone who had been watching her for a long time could know. How did he know about her ex-boyfriend? How did he know about the time she went on a trip to the mountains last summer? The details were too specific, too intimate. She felt like a stranger was digging into her soul, as if her whole life had been a book he'd read from cover to cover. Just before she turned to confront him, he left, disappeared, gone, and just like that, she was alone again, standing in the fluorescent lit aisle, shaking. That night, she locked every door in her apartment and even thought about moving. But the thought of it, of leaving the place she had called home, felt wrong. A few days later, she got a letter. It wasn't addressed to her, it was addressed to the stranger, the one who had been watching her. In the letter, the man wrote that he would be watching her forever. No return address, no name, just the chilling declaration, "I know you better than anyone." She never saw him again, not in the store, not on the street. He was gone. But she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, and whenever she's alone, at night, she can't help but feel the weight of someone's eyes on her. Our next story comes from a Reddit user who, much like many of us, thought they knew what to expect when it came to the supernatural, but this story turned everything upside down, as the line between dream and reality blurred, with terrifying consequences. This one happened late one night when a young man was in the middle of one of his usual late-night gaming sessions. His friends were still online, chatting and laughing, but something wasn't right. At first, he thought it was just the exhaustion. Maybe the lack of sleep was starting to play tricks on him. But then he saw it, a shadow. It wasn't a shadow from the game, nor the room lights. It was something else, something moving, watching, as though it had always been there, lurking in the corner of his room, just out of the edge of his vision. Every time he glanced toward it, the figure would vanish. He could feel its presence. He could feel it watching him. It didn't move, not in the way a normal thing would. Instead, it hovered there, watching and waiting, frozen. He couldn't bring himself to move. His body was stiff, like his limbs were heavy with some unseen weight. But the shadow didn't wait. It moved forward, stretching, its form becoming more defined, more real with each passing second. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. His walls, his computer screen, everything around him started to melt. The edges blurred into darkness, and then, as though it had all been a dream, it was over. The shadow was gone. But now, every time he closes his eyes, that voice echoes in his head. Come closer. Not everything that haunts us comes from the shadows or unexplained noises. Some things are right in front of us, staring back, like a mirror. This story comes from a Reddit user who never believed in the supernatural until one fateful day. They saw something that would change their life forever. It all started when they moved into an old, charming apartment in the city. The rent was cheap, the location was perfect, and the apartment had an antique mirror hanging in the hallway. It was one of those ornate, gold-framed mirrors that had clearly been there for decades, maybe even longer. The first few days went by without incident. Everything was normal. But something about that mirror, something about it always felt off. It wasn't that the mirror was creepy, per southeast, but it always felt like it was too perfect, like it was too well maintained for something so old. It was one night, while they were lying in bed, unable to sleep, that they first noticed it. The reflection in the mirror wasn't theirs. At first, they thought they were just imagining it. Maybe it was the low light from the hallway, playing tricks on their eyes. But the more they stared at the mirror, the more they realized the figure wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a woman, standing perfectly still, just behind the reflection of the apartment door. Her hair was long, dark, and tangled, her clothes tattered, her face twisted in a haunting, anguished expression. She was staring directly at them. Panicked, they rushed into the hallway, turning the corner to check the mirror. But when they looked into it, there was nothing there. No woman, no figure, just the empty hallway, just as it should be. But the fear didn't fade. Over the next few nights, they found themselves drawn to that mirror. No matter how hard they tried to ignore it, each time the woman was there, standing still, staring, and every time they checked the hallway, she would disappear. The pattern continued for days. Every time they walked past that mirror, they'd feel an icy chill run down their spine, and no matter what they did, no matter how many times they tried to leave, they couldn't escape the feeling that the woman in the reflection was somehow waiting for them. One night, they couldn't take it anymore. They had to know what was going on. So, they gathered their courage, and for the first time, they stood in front of the mirror and demanded answers. "What do you want?" they whispered, their voice shaking. The woman didn't speak. She just continued to stare, her expression unreadable. But as they watched, her reflection slowly started to move. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands began to press against the glass, leaving faint smudges, as if she were trying to break through. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The temperature dropped so sharply, they could see their breath fog in the air. Then, with one final, forceful press of her hands, the woman in the mirror screamed, a blood-curdling, piercing scream that echoed through the apartment, shaking the walls. The mirror cracked, but when they looked away from the shattered mirror, there was no sign of it ever having broken. The glass was whole again, pristine as it had been before. The woman was gone. The apartment was silent. For a long time, they sat there, staring at the mirror, unsure of what had just happened. They didn't sleep that night, or the next. The terror that had gripped them was too strong to ignore. The next morning, they packed up their things and left the apartment. They never spoke about it to anyone, but sometimes, late at night, when they close their eyes, they can still hear the woman's scream, echoing in the back of their mind. Now, not all unsettling encounters come from the paranormal. Some of the most disturbing stories come from the darker side of human nature. This next story is one of those. It begins with a Reddit user who had recently moved into a new apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was a fresh start, or so they thought. One night, while coming home from work, they noticed something strange. A car was parked outside their apartment building, a car they didn't recognize. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the man sitting inside. The man stared straight ahead, unmoving. It was almost as if he was waiting for something, or someone. The Reddit user brushed it off as nothing, but every day, the man was there. Every time they came home, he was parked in front of the building, just sitting there, staring into space. At first, it felt like an odd coincidence, but as the days passed, the sense of unease began to grow. They started to feel watched. The man's presence was constant, and no matter how late they came home, he was always there, always in the same spot, staring blankly ahead. One night, they decided to confront him. They walked up to the car and tapped on the window. The man didn't react at first, but when he finally looked over at them, it was as if he hadn't seen them in years. His eyes were empty, vacant, cold. Then, he said something that would haunt them forever. "I've been waiting for you." The Reddit user ran inside, locking every door and window, and after that, the man was never seen again. But they couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching them all along. And worse, the man knew something they didn't, something that made them question if they were ever truly alone. Some stories begin with the feeling of being watched. But what if the person watching you isn't outside your window but inside your very own home? This story comes from a Reddit user who discovered that sometimes, the creepiest things aren't in plain sight. They had recently moved into an old house in a quiet town, looking for a peaceful place to start over. The house, though a bit dated, had an inviting charm, the kind of place that seemed perfect for someone who needed some peace and quiet. But from the first night, things were off. At first, it was subtle, a faint scratching sound that seemed to come from behind the walls. It wasn't constant, just every once in a while, late at night. They chalked it up to the house settling, An old house like this could make strange noises, but it kept happening. The scratching, then soft thuds, as if someone was knocking quietly, trying to get attention. The Reddit user dismissed it, but then the sounds grew louder, more frequent. Sometimes, they could hear the unmistakable sound of something moving in the walls, as if there was someone hiding just out of sight. One night, unable to ignore the sounds any longer, they decided to investigate. They grabbed a flashlight, their heart racing, and headed toward the source of the noise. The hallway between the kitchen and the bathroom. The sound was coming from behind the wall, somewhere close by. They pressed their ear against the wall, listening. The scratching stopped, replaced by the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, deep breaths, as if someone was waiting for them. They froze, horrified, unsure of what to do next. And then, it happened. The wall in front of them seemed to tremble slightly, but then, something extraordinary. The wall shifted, just a little. A hidden door, one they hadn't noticed before, creaked open, revealing a small, dark space. Inside, it was cold. There was no sign of anyone, but the space was oddly clean, as if someone had been using it. It was clear that whoever, or whatever, had been behind the wall had been living there, hidden from view. But the terror didn't stop there. As they examined the hidden room, they found something chilling. On the floor, in the corner, was a small pile of clothes, worn, torn, and covered in dust. There was also a series of photographs. Some of them were of the Reddit user, taken in their own home. They flipped through the photos, their hands shaking. Some were taken from inside their house, through the windows. Others were from inside their bedroom, taken while they were asleep. They turned around, hoping to leave the room, but then they noticed something else, a message, written on the wall in what looked like dried blood. "I've always been here, I will always be watching." With horror, they realized that the person who had been watching them had been living in their walls all along, a stranger who had infiltrated their home, hidden away in the very space they thought was safe. They fled the house that night, and never returned. The police investigated the house, but found nothing of interest. The hidden room had vanished, as if it had never existed at all. But to this day, They wonder, who was that person, and what had they been planning, and most terrifying of all, is the thought that there are still people out there who know how to hide in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Our next story is a little different. This one isn't about a haunted house or a stalker in the walls. Instead, it's about a strange, unsettling experience that takes place entirely online. In the world of Reddit, anything can happen. And sometimes, it's the unexpected that turns the most ordinary interactions into terrifying ones. This story comes from a Reddit user who was just trying to engage with the community. They'd been part of the Reddit world for years, commenting on posts, sharing their own stories, and enjoying the anonymity of the platform. But one day, they made a comment on a random post, and that's when things started to get strange. The post was about a mysterious disappearance, a missing person case that had gained traction in the community. They casually commented, offering their own thoughts. It was a harmless exchange, just a typical day in the Reddit-verse. But then they received a message, a private message, from a user they didn't recognize. The message was simple: "I saw you." They thought it was a joke, maybe just some random troll trying to get a reaction. But the message kept coming, and the more they tried to ignore it, the more persistent the messages became, each one more unsettling than the last. "I saw you in the store yesterday," the message read. "You were wearing the red jacket. Then, I know where you live." They immediately blocked the user, thinking it would stop. But it didn't. The messages continued, each one more detailed. They would mention places the Reddit user had been, conversations they had with friends, even things they had posted on other subreddits. It became clear that this wasn't just a random troll. This person had been following them, and worse, they seemed to know everything about them. The Reddit user couldn't take it anymore. They deleted their account and created a new one, hoping to start fresh. But that's when the most chilling message arrived. "Did you really think you could escape? Not all mirrors reflect the truth. Sometimes, they reveal something far more sinister." This story comes from a Reddit user who shared a chilling experience that began with a simple antique mirror. After moving into a new apartment, They found an old mirror left behind by the previous tenant. It was ornate, with intricate carvings and a slightly tarnished surface. They decided to keep it, thinking it added character to the room. But soon, they began to notice something strange. At night, they would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror, shadows that didn't correspond to anything in the room, faces that weren't their own. At first, they dismissed it as their imagination, but the occurrences became more frequent and more disturbing. One night, they woke up to find a man standing in the mirror, staring directly at them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. When they turned on the light, the figure vanished. They tried to get rid of the mirror, but no matter what they did, it always found its way back into their apartment. Eventually, they decided to destroy it. They took a hammer and smashed the mirror into pieces, but instead of relief, they felt a deep sense of dread. That night, they woke up to find shards of the mirror arranged on their bed, spelling out a single word. Why? They moved out the next day, leaving the mirror and whatever was attached to it behind. Not all horrors are supernatural. Some are rooted in the darkest corners of the human mind. This next story comes from a Reddit user who shared an experience that left them questioning their own reality. They began finding post-it notes around their apartment with messages they didn't remember writing. At first, they thought it was a prank, but the notes became more personal, referencing conversations they hadn't had and events that hadn't occurred. Concerned, they installed security cameras to catch the culprit, but the footage showed no one entering or leaving the apartment. It was as if the notes were appearing out of thin air. They turned to Reddit for help, and one user suggested checking for carbon monoxide. They bought a detector, and it immediately went off. The apartment was filled with the deadly gas, which can cause memory loss and hallucinations. They evacuated immediately, and the landlord fixed the leak, but the experience left them shaken, a reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying threats are the ones we can't see. Our final story for tonight comes from a Reddit user who discovered that sometimes, the most horrifying monsters are the ones we trust the most. They had been dating someone for a few months when they began to notice strange behavior. Their partner would disappear for hours without explanation and became increasingly secretive. One night, they decided to follow them. What they discovered was beyond anything they could have imagined. Their partner was leading a double life, involved in activities that were not only illegal but deeply disturbing. They had been using their relationship as a cover, hiding their true nature behind a mask of normalcy. The Reddit user reported them to the authorities and ended the relationship immediately, but the experience left them with a lingering fear, a constant question. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Nature is beautiful, but it can also be unsettling, especially when you're alone and the silence starts whispering back. This story comes from a Reddit user who loved hiking and often camped in remote areas. One weekend, they ventured into a lesser-known forest trail deep in the Appalachian Mountains. They hiked alone, set up camp, and enjoyed the peaceful isolation. But as night fell, the forest changed. They heard whispers, at first faint and unintelligible like wind passing through branches, but soon, they realized the whispers were words calling their name. They tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone else was out there. But when they stepped outside their tent with a flashlight, there was nothing, just the rustling of leaves and silence. They didn't sleep that night. Every time they closed their eyes, they heard the whispering again. It circled their tent, taunting them, laughing softly, calling them deeper into the woods. At dawn, they packed up in a frenzy and sprinted back down the trail. They never returned. The strange part, when they shared this on Reddit, several others claimed to have experienced the same phenomenon in the same forest. Have you ever gotten a phone call that chilled you to your core? One Reddit user did, and the voice on the other end, it was their own. They received a call in the middle of the night from a number they didn't recognize. When they answered, the voice sounded exactly like theirs but terrified. It begged them not to go to work the next day. The call ended abruptly. The next morning, they dismissed it as a prank, but on the way to work, a semi-truck ran a red light and barely missed their car. Had they been just a second slower, they would have been crushed. When they tried calling the number back, it was disconnected. They checked with their phone provider, no record of the call. To this day, They don't know what happened, but one thing is clear. Someone or something was trying to warn them. Let's end tonight with a story that blurs the line between reality and delusion. A Reddit user began having the same dream every night, wandering alone, narrow hallway filled with hundreds of closed doors. The walls were dark, the air was thick, but one door stood out. It glowed faintly, and every night, they got a little closer to it. Eventually, they opened it. Inside was a version of their own bedroom, but something was wrong. The bed was occupied. They saw themselves lying motionless, pale and lifeless. They woke up screaming. They thought the nightmare was over, but when they got home from work, the door to their bedroom was slightly ajar even though they swore they had closed it, and inside, on the bed, was an old photo they'd never seen before of them sleeping. No one has been able to explain it. Reality is fragile, whether it's haunted mirrors, whispered names in the woods, or voices that shouldn't exist. These stories remind us that the line between the normal and the terrifying is razor thin, and sometimes, it's Reddit where those cracks in the world first show. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through disturbing true stories from Reddit. If you enjoyed these unsettling tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back with more disturbing stories that you won't believe are real. Until next time, sleep tight.